Hey y'all, I'm Thomas Mooney, and you're listening to the Neon Eon. Go ahead, prop yourself up next to this jukebox. I promise we aren't rocking this jukebox. This one, it's part of the country club. It was born country. Pure country, matter of fact. Alright, I promise I'll stop with the song references, for now at least. So, you're listening to the first episode of the Neon Eon. This first episode is with Clay Walker. I was really excited when we got him confirmed as the first guest. When I was setting this all back up, kind of laying the groundwork for this show back in the fall, I sent out a handful of emails explaining what I was wanting to do here, and Clay and his people were the first to get back to me with a, yeah, let's do it. That really put a little wind in the sails and really got the ball rolling. If you're unfamiliar with what you're listening to right now, well, the Neon Eon, this is a 90s country-focused podcast. I've given the Neon Eon a 15-year window from about 1986 to around 2001. As of now, the Neon Eon is a weekly podcast that'll show up every Wednesday. I talk a lot more at length about all this in the little trailer that was posted last week. So if you want a little bit more context and detail, go give that a listen. But basically, most of these will be in the interview variety with different artists, songwriters, musicians, and so on who are part of the era. A few will be with journalists and artists of today too, but for like 90% of them, they'll be with the artists of that day. Since this is the first episode, here are a few other things that I want to go ahead and mention. One, it should be pretty obvious, but please hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. One of the things that people almost always mention is that they don't see new episodes on the official feed when a show has been released. I get the confusion and the frustration. One way to combat that and to get episodes as soon as they're posted is to do the obvious, and that is subscribe. And if you are listening to iTunes, go ahead and give the podcast a 5-star review. It'll give us a giant boost in all the algorithm stuff and everything, which you should also go ahead and give us a like and a follow on all the various social media platforms out there too. Head on over to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, type in the Neon Eon, and we should just pop right up. The direct handle is at the Neon Eon. It's a great way to be part of the conversation and discussion going forward. Speaking of which, I've added a few new tiers to my Patreon that are Neon Eon specific. That's a great way to help support the podcast. And I won't bore you with just listing all the perks and everything, but in general, if you become a patron, you'll get bonus content, Neon Eon merch, and ad-free episodes, which these first few episodes I'm throwing up ad-free. Think of these as being presented with limited interruption by New Slang. And if you're unfamiliar with New Slang, well, that's my other podcast that is about Americana and country music. You should subscribe to that as well if you feel so inclined. Hopefully you do. And all these links that I've mentioned, they will be in the show notes for easy access. Just go straight there and yeah. Okay, I think that just about does it. Thank you so much for tuning into this first episode. Here is Clay Walker.
Yeah, Thomas, it's great to be on with you, and look forward to a robust discussion about great music and great times.
Yeah, well, I want to start off with, you come from the Beaumont area, and it seemed like back in that late 80s, early 90s, it was just kind of a place where people would go out and find country music singers like you and Tracy Byrd and Mark Chestnut and Clint Black. You guys all came from, this one area of Texas, and it was kind of a hotbed. At the time though, like how aware were you of it being a hotbed, if you will?
I think it surprised all of us. Everybody kind of lives in somewhat of a bubble. You live in the area that you grew up in. And most people never leave it. And I don't think we thought we were that special. I think we all knew that there was talent, in the area, and it raised the bar, for each person. I think Mark Chestnut did, I got to give him the credit for, really getting things kicked off at that particular era. There were, of course, people that came before him, like Tex Ritter and George Jones and other entertainers, that were, and even on the rock side, you had Johnny and Edgar Winters. ZZ Top did a lot around there, the Beaumont, Port Arthur area, Janis Joplin. So you had an era, in the 60s and 70s that was pretty incredible as well. And then, this Mark, I guess, got some interest from MCA, in Nashville, and that sort of, bringing industry folks down, and I think, that kind of cowboy way, image, it was really caught on, and I think Clint Black, especially, with his rise in popularity, and just kind of took country music by storm. Great songwriter, and all of that was just elements that kind of started laying the ground, laying the road, the path for Chestnut, and then Bird, and then myself to Nashville and being discovered. But I can't really put my finger on what it was. Was there a particular sound in music that we all had that was different? I don't think it was actually instrumentation. I think it was something, and this is my guess, that the human ear, and soul hears truth, and I call it EQ, emotional intelligence, and I think that's what we all three were laying down, to Mark, Tracy, and myself. We grew up in a blue collar town and blue collar families, and our dads worked blue collar jobs, and that's still who we are to this day. And I think that resonated with our audience, our potential audience that was out there.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder too, is like if you're from a place that maybe you're not aware of, like, the history, or like, you kind of think of, I'm just from this little small town and no one's really ever made it out. Once you're aware, you become aware of someone else doing it, it kind of gives you that little bit of like, oh, if they did it, I can do it too. And, let's just chase those dreams.
That's a good point, Thomas. Seeing somebody else do it, for sure, gives you the possibility that you can. My hat's off to the people that don't have something to reach for, and they just set the bar themselves. And I'm very impressed with those kind of folks too. And I guess we recently, in the last 10, 15 years, we saw a surgence, in folks from Georgia. It's like the same thing that happened in Beaumont, Texas, or that area, Southeast Texas. And it's really cool when I think, because that's the only two times that I know of it, happening in towns like that. And there may be others, but those are the ones I'm aware of. And there's no doubt that seeing Mark, seeing MCA come down and watching him at Cutters in the bar, playing the same bars that I played in, Tracy played in. I was a little younger than both those guys, and it was like a sixth or seventh or eighth grader watching a senior guy play high school football, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's how you do it. And so I was always very taken with Mark singing. He just had a really great country voice that he could sing anything, and he just sounded good. And I think Tracy would say the same thing, about Mark. He's really very unique and a great singer.
Yeah, like that you talking about like your all your parents kind of being blue collar, and you growing up in, you know, essentially the country, and just, I think like there's a lot of that hard work, that work ethic that does come across in those songs, because it doesn't feel like, you know, none of you guys were, you know, just given the silver platter at the beginning or anything.
Yeah, I think when you grow up having to work for things, like most people do, you know, the reward, even the little bitty small wins, you know, uh, they they mean so much, you know, and that's what you build on, you know. Uh, I remember trying to put my first band together and how difficult that was, you know, that you know, finding talent, you know, that could sound good, that you could grow together and become better, and then, you know, having to let people go that you know, weren't cutting it, but you know, we're good people. You know, there's a lot of things that, you know, I wouldn't trade for anything. You know, the way that we had to come up in the '90s, you know, with music, and it's done, you know, quite a bit different today. You know, it's almost you know, well, I don't know, it's hard to really say, you know, how much different it is. And I mean, it's drastically. You know, I see people, you know, they make it off of the shows, you know, like The Voice or you know, American Idol, or you know, America's Got Talent, stuff like that. You see a lot of singers, you know, coming into talent contests like that, but I don't know their history. You know, I don't. From what I see, most of them didn't have to come up through the bars, you know, like we did, and there's just a different set of circumstances, a different set of hardships. You know, not that either one of them is easier than the other, but I think the songs are gonna be different. You know, this new album that that I'm recording right now. You know, one of the first single off of it is called "We All Need a Bar Sometime," and it's you know, you see people going out to bars like I used to, but you don't see a lot of bar bands. And I mean, basically, I can't even remember the last time I saw a bar band. But that's how we cut our teeth, and the people that were out there, you know, either on the dance floor or drinking at the bar, those were people that were just blue collar working people. So we always had our audience, you know, to learn from. And if they liked the music, they were dancing. If they didn't like the music, they weren't dancing. You know, and that was a way that you kept your job. You know, when I was coming up, or Mark or Tracy, if you didn't keep people on the dance floor, you lost your job, and it was that simple. And so there was always an expectation, you know, I mean, extreme expectation and demand that you understood your audience, and I think that's what's made, you know, me a viable entertainer, you know, and being able to stay relevant is because I have that, you know, learned and somewhat innate ability to read the audience and know what they're feeling.
Yeah, like that's, to me, that's such an interesting time. You mentioned the whole bar thing, and like the, you know, obviously having to keep people out on the dance floor, because, you know, if they're out on the dance floor, they're probably going to the bar and buying some beer too. And you know, those gigs right there they can be very difficult and trying, and because sometimes they're super long, or, you know, you're not being able to, especially when you're starting out, you're not able to play just too much of your own material. You know, you got to play what, you know, some of the standards and stuff, and maybe sneak in some of the stuff that you're working on as well. Obviously, like, it can be incredibly fun at the same time. What were those like? I guess like those early days like? Was there? Did you feel like looking back now that those were trying times, or that like the you kind of was there any ever point where you're like, man, I don't know if this is what I want to do?
But I never felt like that. I always felt great. When you grow up poor, and you I guess I played football in all the way through grade school and then into high school, and so I can't tell you how forward I look to Friday nights. Those were the best days of my life, and the continuum of that was playing in bars. I would have played for free. Sometimes I did, but there was never a time where I was like, man, I don't like this, or I'm going to give this up. That was never in my lexicon, or my brain. I was always just, I'm going to do this because I love it for the rest of my life, and I don't care if I die broke. I'm going to do it. And I know that Mark, had that same mentality, and because we talked about it a couple of times. There were some nights, where and I didn't know Tracy. Even though we went to same high school, he was a couple years ahead of me, and I didn't get there till late to that particular school, and so I didn't really know Tracy, but I did know Mark some, not great friends, but friendly. And I remember one night I was asking him some questions or getting some advice from him, and he was always encouraging and always willing to share his knowledge about singing or performing, and I look at those times and I'm like, man, they were wonderful, and before he actually had a record deal and had a hit song on the radio, they were he's still the same person, and I remember him telling me about limitations, that all singers had limitations, and the ones that were great were the ones that knew where those limitations were and worked great, in those limitations and didn't get outside of them. And I thought, man, I never like to think about limitations, but he's so right, and I think that's one of the things that made Emmitt Smith, one of the greatest running backs of all time, is he ran between the tackles. He knew where his strength was, and he stayed in there. And so I started looking early on, to find my strength. That was good, encouraging things. But no, not ever did I think about doing something else for a living or quitting at any point. Never. And I would say that the ones who do make it have never thought about quitting. And I mean, maybe you've heard different, in interviews, but the great ones, I don't think ever thought about quitting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of figured that was going to be the answer, but I at the same time I had to ask. You mentioned just a minute ago about some of those like entry points into the music scene in Nashville and getting signed and stuff, and early on you'd written. I guess I had read that you had written "Live Until I Die," hoping to maybe get in with that song as far as getting that cut by someone else. Yeah. I find that really interesting because that's obviously like a way that a lot of artists can break into getting into the industry. Was there ever anyone in mind that you had, or was there any like how far did that go down that road before you ended up like obviously cutting it yourself?
That's Thomas, that's one of the most interesting questions that I've ever been asked, and I think I'm going to have fun answering it because I've never been asked that question. And I when I look at artists, and I mean all of the ones that I consider great, had very distinct influences, and they always cited them, pointed to them. And I'll give you an example, and then I'll answer the question more pointedly. But Merle Haggard's idol was Lefty Frizzell and Wynn Stewart. And when you look at Merle's recordings, his very first song, I think it was "Sing Me a Song." It's real high. It's got that Wynn Stewart sound to it. And then as you listen to some of his later songs, "Here Comes Lefty's" sound in Merle's voice. You can just hear the influence in there, right? And then you had George Strait, who idolized Merle, right? And so you could hear some of that in Strait's early songs, and then Chestnut loved George Jones. That was his big influence, and there was a time, when we played the bars, people would say, man, if Chestnut sang on Merle, there were times, when we played the bars, that if Chestnut sang a George Jones song, you could put your hands over your eyes and you couldn't hardly tell that it wasn't George, and that's a big compliment to Chestnut. And when I was coming up, I had a bunch of influences, but nobody was bigger than Randy Travis. When I was playing the bars, and so when I wrote the song "Live Until I Die," I wrote that song in hopes that Randy Travis would record it. And if you listen to it today and picture Randy's voice on it, you could see that it would lay right in there, for that song, because I wrote it right at him, and he never heard it. I tried to get it to him, but when I was just a kid, I was 17 years old and trying to get somebody to hear my song, and sometimes that never happens. Most of the time, it never happens. But what was unique to me, and probably one of the highlights of my career, is when "Live Until I Die" was climbing the charts. And "Live Until I Die" was my second song. "What's It to You" was first, and it went number one. And then "Live Until I Die" started climbing the charts. And Randy Travis was somewhere on the charts, either having a number one record that week, or he was somewhere in the charts but high up, and he was being interviewed. And the interviewer asked Randy Travis, is there any music out there right now, that you're really digging, that you really like? And he said, yeah. He said, there's this kid, Clay Walker. He said, has a song. He says, sounds like I could have sang it. And I about fell out of my truck door. I was like, you got to be kidding me that he recognized that. And the fact that he recognized it was just validation, that I was on the right path, that I knew and felt country music, and that I was starting to become a part of its fabric at that point. And that just means so much. And I think most entertainers are kind of like border collie dogs. They live on praise, and that was a very big and special moment for me.
Yeah, that's back when we listened to the radio a lot, and I can remember always like these moments listening to songs in like my dad's truck and stuff. And so, yeah, I find it always interesting that a lot of these moments, these watershed moments for y'all always happen listening to the radio. Yeah, that's just like something specifically like 90s and before, everything kind of being tied to the radio, these memories.
Part of that, Thomas, is really that, most people where I grew up, were just, just really not very rich people, and buying a record, first of all, if you think back, there used to be record stores. Like, you would go into a store and there would be a vinyl record in there, and depending on how popular it was or not, it may or not have been in there when you went in there, so you couldn't even get it, if you could afford it. But let's just say you couldn't afford it, like most people. You listened to it on the radio for free, and that was, I think that's why so many people listened, and not only that, I used to love, you don't hear this very much anymore, but I used to love listening to, DJs introduce a record. I mean, it would get you fired up, a DJ could really make you buy in quick, and especially if it was great. And a lot of that beauty has been diluted, and it's still there, but the radio to me is always going to be the darling place to find new music and to listen to your favorites.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's something very specifically country music and very like America. Like whenever you think of America, you kind of think of apple pie and Chevrolet trucks and country music on the radio. And as far as like listening to music, obviously I want to hear music in person. That's the best place to hear it. But I think like an underrated second is in the cab of your truck, driving down the road. So. You mentioned, you wrote that song at 17. I find that really remarkable because I'm trying to think back at who I was at 17, and I don't know if I necessarily would have had that kind of like big picture life lesson, grand kind of like just capturing all those like I guess like some of the secrets to life, if you will, at that age.
Say that last piece again. I'm sorry, struggling.
Oh, I was just saying, like, I find it remarkable that you were able to, like, you tapped into all that kind of like those life lessons in that song at such an early age.
I was writing yesterday with a really hot songwriter right now. He's had a bunch of hits recently, some on Jason Aldean. His name is Jaron Boyer, and we wrote yesterday at my home. And there's another guy named Michael Tyler who's just has a little bit of radio success, but mainly a writer. And he's 26, and he's been here since he was 15, the Michael Tyler guy. And so I looked over at Jaron. Michael Tyler had left the room, and I said, you've been writing with him since he was 15? He said, yeah. I said, did he have chops then, at that age? And he goes, you wouldn't believe it. And so that's the kind of thing I think when it's that EQ thing again, that emotional intelligence that I was speaking of earlier is, and some people have it, in spades, and some people don't have it at all, and then sometimes it can grow. But I think it's a lot like IQ. People are born with it, and with how high it's going to go. And I perceived at a very early age, and could just feel people, and I don't know. I mean, I would call it a gift, from God. But in writing that song, I look back at "Live Until I Die," and I ask my own self, how could I have written that song at 17? It just, because when I see 17-year-olds or think about 17-year-olds, I can't imagine them, having, that kind of depth at that age. I can't imagine. I don't remember having that kind of depth, because I wasn't aware of it, of myself. But it was, it's interesting though, and I appreciate you raising the topic. It's and that is my favorite song, by the way. And I've written a lot of songs and had success with some of them, and I've sang a lot of songs that I've had success that I didn't write. But that song right there is it's special because it there's not only words, there's a lot of deep emotion. When I listen back to the record and listen back to my vocal, I'm like, I'll never be able to sing it like that again. I might be able to sing it better, as far as someone would go, oh, that's more audibly clean, but never with that particular kind of emotion. I have a different kind of emotion, maybe just as strong, but there's a uniqueness to it that I'm glad is there. And That song carries a lot of stories with it down the road. Or on the road, I've had people approach me, about it being, something that was played at a funeral. That it was their grandfather's favorite song. I've had it. People say it was played at graduation. Because it meant so much about growing up around people they loved, and they wanted to carry those memories into their life and come back every high school reunion. So there's a place where that song fits in to people's lives that has touched me more than any other song I've ever recorded, and it's always going to be special. And each night on stage, when we do it, it's one of, if not the highlight for me.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's one of those songs that, as like people come up to you and mention, their connection to it, it just has to build for you. It makes it that much stronger for you as far as like, it's yeah, like I just can't imagine like just people coming up and telling you, this how basically how important that song has been for them in their life, or a moment in their life, or but that's obviously what music and songs do. One of the things I was wanting to ask you about, connected right to all this, has been, so you get like a record deal, obviously, and like a lot of people, when you get a record deal, before then you've had a lot of time to write songs and kind of get songs together, and of course, like those first couple of records, you have a lot more cuts that are just solo by yourself writing. How did songwriting change once all the other stuff that is attached to being on a record label gets added to your schedule? Like, did songwriting change for you as far as like even just on like did it make it more difficult to schedule out and all that stuff? How did it change?
I would say that their time allocation is probably the hardest thing for everybody in this world, much less an entertainer, but I had my whole life to write my first album, and I was really young, obviously, but I didn't have anything, to distract from it. And, I played in clubs, 5 or 6 nights a week, and I worked 3 jobs. And somehow I always gravitated to songwriting, and I think I just did it all the time in my head, no matter where I was, what I was doing. If I was having a conversation with someone, or if I was just driving, I was thinking about songwriting. And once I got a record deal, then it's just part of the situation that when you start having any success at all, people are going to want part of your time and need it to perpetuate what you're promoting, what you're doing. So songwriting is now a much more scheduled event if you're going to write with someone else, which is probably the preferred thing to do. Most songs are co-written. Most good songs that you hear on the radio, it's rare you see one writer on a song these days. And I think that's because 2 heads are better than one most of the time. Unfortunately, I didn't have someone to write with on my first album, so I wrote most of it by myself. But I do enjoy, having the structure, in my career with a good management company like TKO, and having people that really do their job well, so that my time's not wasted, and that I'm not the most administrative guy in the world, believe me, and so having some people help out with that, is a godsend. I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly like you asked it, but just shedding some light on, how life does change after you, get a record deal, or there's these expectations, and it's an industry. It's the beautiful part of it is the piece that the fans get to see. That is the beautiful part, and it's the part why we all work, do the working part. The playing the songs on the stage is not work. I think any entertainer who feels that way probably ends up quitting. That's the fun part. That's the icing on the cake. All the work came way before that, and the part about traveling, though, I think most entertainers would agree with me, at least in private, that we all hate it. We hate getting on the bus and traveling down, bumpy roads, or drivers that are not smooth, and there's all kind of elements that we deal with that we don't like. But none of those elements, top or compared to the joy that happens when we get on stage with those fans, and that's why we do it. It's worth it. But there's definitely a change in your life when you have some success and you get into the machine, as I like to call it. You can't operate outside that machine. It's there. It's always going to be there. And when you understand it and can make it work for you, that's when things really start coming together, and you start seeing the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, it all goes back to that whole, you've had your entire life to write that debut record, and then after that, you're given 8 months to write the next record, or whatever the case is. And yeah, I find that whole thing about, you have to, all your time starts getting more divided, and you got more obligations to do this and that are along with all this. Whenever art and commerce come together, like to make it run smoothly, you got to have like that schedule aspect of it. And you mentioned being out on the road. I know a lot of people, they always talk about the whole, I don't get paid for that 90 minutes on stage, or whatever the case is. It's all the traveling and stuff. That's where like you want to get paid for, because as you mentioned, you get on that bus, and when you're traveling around the country, it's not necessarily like you're able to just stop in and see all the tourist sites, if you will. You're in a bus, you know what I mean? Like you're going and just seeing like these really small pockets of these towns that at the end of the day kind of all look the same, because you're going to a venue, and you're going to a hotel and all that kind of stuff.
I would say, though, Thomas, that I have always enjoyed the uniqueness of each town, and there are some commonalities, that you can say, oh, this is, all towns are kind of like this, but you can never say that. That I think every single town and audience has a different fingerprint, and I've experienced that. My whole career. That is one of the things that does make the touring aspect of it exciting. Is it never starts out the same for me, and I'm serious. And I never know what song is going to light up that audience, and it's like the Forrest Gump box of chocolate thing. You just it really is cool. And one of the things that I that I made a habit of doing, you know, the last few years of my career for sure. Maybe not early on. You know, early on it was a blur, man. We were doing 200 shows a year. It was crazy. And I told myself I'd never do that again. I did that for 2 years. I was like, never, not ever, you know. But now so much, man. I like to get out. You know, I'll go to a restaurant in town, you know, or I'll drive around the town square, or I'll go play golf, and I'll meet people. But I actually talk to people, you know, everywhere I go, and almost everywhere we go. I mean, I can't even think of a place where we haven't really been welcomed, you know, with a really nice hospitality. But that's just the way country music bands are, you know. They're full of hospitality, but I have, you know, I can say that I can't remember the last time I didn't do this. That I've been able to shake people's hands and ask them about, you know, their own life and what's going on in the town, you know, or what's the big deal about the town, you know, or what's it known for, or, you know, how's the local who's the best local football team, you know, high school football team, and seriously, I've had some incredible conversations that come out of that, and a lot of times, you know, it'll even come from law enforcement, you know, security or whoever's at the deal. We'll just have conversations, and I'll get the skinny, you know, on what's going on with the mayor or the, you know, local politicians, and what's the best restaurant in town, and you know, and the band will have a lot of things to say too, you know, like we'll get back on the bus that night and somebody will say, oh, I met this person, you know, and then this guy was so funny, or this guy took me fishing, or we went to go do this, or, you know, there's always something that is unique, you know, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's a grind, but you know, what I was signaling earlier was that, you know, riding on the bus is not the most comfortable thing to do, you know, and so when you have a good driver like we do, you know, you try to hang on to them so you can get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
But man, I never, ever can imagine, you know, me not taking my last breath on a bus. You know, I think that will happen because no matter how much success or money or fame or anything, we really, the ones that do love it, like I do, they know what I'm talking about. It's like this thing, like breathing is important to people, right? Probably the most important thing. Music is probably second to that. Like, I have to do it. It has to come out of me. I have to share that, and I have to feel back, you know, the audience. I need to feel it coming back the other way, and that's, I don't know how to put it in any other terms than that to get the point across. But that's how I truly feel.
Yeah, you know, that's, if there was any, I guess, like second guessing if you're from Texas, you definitely like landed it with asking about local football, local high school football. That is, I feel like everyone still loves high school football here in Texas, and you'll still go to a game regardless.
You know, I was in town. We have a ranch in Mineola, Texas, and and I was there last year during homecoming, and my wife and kids, we were all there, and we went down to East Texas Burger and had a cheeseburger, and then the parade was coming through, and you know, my wife Jess and I went out there with the kids and enjoyed the parade, and then we went to the football game that night, and literally, you know, when I sat down in the stands and I could just smell the grass, I felt like I was down there, you know. Anybody who's played football or been a cheerleader or been a part of it, coaching or anything, you know, you that's something that I think most Texans do gravitate to and understand the concept. You know, pretty much everything in my life I compare to football. You know, like it's just got so many parallels to life. You know, you're either in bounds or you're out of bounds. There's no in between. You're either in or you're out.
Oh man. Okay, so like going back to, you know, early on, I guess. Early on, you know, you really busted out of the gate with these these like bigger kind of up tempo anthems. But I feel like still nestled in a lot of like your sound early on, and I think it's progressed as the career's gone along, has been like you're tied to these like more emotional, weighty, in depth ballads. What I guess like was what was it like, I guess, early on balancing those two kinds of, I guess, songs, and as far as having these big sweeping anthems, but then also like the emotional weight tied to these like intense ballads.
Not sure. I could say that definitely. It's if you're a guitar player or you play piano or whatever instrument, I never was trained, to play, like professionally trained, play guitar or piano. So I never could play fast songs. My band could, I guess, but if I was writing or if I was doing whatever, I never really had the chops, to play real fast up tempo songs. So I think part of that is why I gravitated to ballads. And I think the more important part is that, I think I deep down always wanted to be in love. I really, and I don't know if everybody feels that way or not, but the songs that I gravitated to, from junior high into high school, and all of them, were either about deep heartbreak or deep falling in love, and so those are the ones that also I think were the kind of people I wanted, the kind of girls I wanted to be around, that liked those kind of songs, and so I guess that no rhyme or reason, but when I look back on my own career too, and I look back on catalog of songs, I think about songs like This Woman and This Man, soulful ballad. I think about a song like I Can't Sleep, a song I wrote down in Galveston. Hypnotize the Moon, really great, love song. Fall, the song Fall. And then I just have, I guess, those kind of songs have always been like magnets to me in writing or choosing. Even songs I didn't write, I would choose songs like that. And I also think that I was blessed with a pretty big vocal range, and so if a girl, or a guy has a certain body part that they like or think looks good, they're going to accentuate it in what they wear, and so I think for me vocally, knowing that I probably had an above average range, I would like to sing those kind of songs to stretch out and let people see, what I could do and see if it moved them. But I did learn too, that vocal range is not even, if you look at everything that's important about a singer and you just name, the top 10 things, vocal range is not in the top 5. And that's the truth. It's because, but I enjoyed it. The point is that I did enjoy the challenge of doing it. But I learned through the years that the most important thing is kind of going back to that Mark Chestnut statement about learn your limitations and be the best you can inside of them. Emotion is delivered, in the tone of your voice, not in the range. So, I don't mean to sound too technical, but just kind of trying to give a complete picture here in an interview that I think could be interesting to the listener, maybe hearing something different, than they normally hear. And I'm a pretty deep guy. I do analyze things quite a bit. But if I was analyzing why ballads are probably, my strength, I think it's because that's where I live, emotionally.
Yeah, yeah, of course, like that. Like, there's all the emotional ties that you can get out of the voice that where you're not even saying, you don't even have to necessarily say a certain word or anything. Um, it can just be kind of like that vocal run, or obviously there's moments, especially in some of the songs that you've done, where like you can feel that tension and that graveliness will come out.
Well, you know, I think that is the secret to success, is being able to tap into that emotion. And that gravelly thing for me is comes from down inside. I have worked with producers who wanted me to tamp that down some, and I'd be like, man, I you know and I understand it. I think there's a temperance that you can use with it, but for the most part, man, that's why I like singing live. I don't hold anything back live when I'm when I'm on the stage in front of a live audience. It is there's no going back. You're in that moment. There's nothing that's going to that you can drag back to, and there's nothing you can do about what's about to happen. You just got to be in it. And I've always gotten my rush, from being in front of the live audience, because it is what it is right then and there, and it's in real time, and it's not like a CD, it's not like a digital recording of any kind, MP3. It is raw, and I know that for a fact that my fan base is in tune with me in that regard, that they know that when they come to a live show, I leave it all out there. There's nothing left. I empty it out, and I hope that most entertainers could say that. I think in my career, if I was most satisfied with something, it's that. And are all nights great? Probably not. But is every night all I have? 100%. It's never like I'm going to hold back on this night so I can do better on that night, or I'm going to hold back on this note so I'll sing the next song this way. It's always wide open. Here's 100%.
Yeah. You mentioned some of these big songs like "Hypnotize the Moon" and "This Man and This Woman." Obviously, songs that you ended up cutting from other songwriters. What was, I guess, like early on, or not even early on, but like in the middle of your career, what was it like when you had these songs being shown to you, and what was that process like of realizing, like, oh, let's cut this song, and was there like always just like that instant connection to some of them?
I think that there was this fear, and then there was this shock. The fear was, when I came to town. You got to remember that I had not co-written songs before, like written with other writers, nor had I ever been pitched a song that someone else wrote. So here I am. I've got two things to go by. I've got the great songs on the radio, because the only thing that they played on the radio were hits. Big songs, the greatest of the great, right? And then I had my songs that I had written, and some of them stood up to some of the really good songs that were on the radio, but not all of them. So then I got to town, and my fear was that I was not going to get pitched the great songs, and also, what if I chose wrong? What if here I got these songs I've written, and then I've got other people pitching me a song. What if I choose the wrong song and it doesn't make it, right? And then the shock to me was that when I did get a phenomenal song pitched to me, like This Woman and This Man, the shock was, why would they give that to me? And that I had it. I felt like that I had won the lottery. Literally, I felt like I bought a ticket and won the freaking lottery. And those are great moments, and they happen for any any singer out there that's having success on the radio, George Strait included, they feel that way. When they get one of those songs handed to them, they feel like they've won the lottery.
Yeah. What I find so interesting, you mentioned obviously George Strait, and if there's one thing that people always nitpick with George is that, he didn't write a lot of his songs. He's written a bunch lately, and I guess like a few early on, but for the most part, he's getting a lot of songs pitched to him. And what I find that the remarkable part is that there's nothing that doesn't sound like those all sound like George Strait songs. And I don't think any of those writers would think of them as anything other than George Strait songs. For you, like obviously a lot of these songs, there's that connection. Like obviously you cut them, and it feels like there's this, you have some ownership to them. What I find remarkable is that you're able to weave in the stuff that you've written and some of these other cuts, and they're all seamless.
Yeah, you're very smart to recognize that, Thomas. And I can tell you, I don't know a lot about your show, but I know that it is successful, and it's going to continue to even be more successful because you're hitting on points that are very interesting from an artist standpoint to answer, right? And also I think from a fan standpoint of getting to hear those answers, you're drawing things out of an artist that is not what I would call your mail it in interview, where you're going to get a standard stock answer. And so I want to answer this question and try to give it a complete view that, and let's call it two lenses, right? Like you have two eyes, most people do, and if you wear glasses, then one lens may be different than the other to give you a full picture, right? And I was always interested in songwriting. That part of it, because my dad did it. My dad did it when I was a kid. I watched him do it, and he loved writing, and so I probably started trying that when I was very young, and so it's always been a part of me. One is, and let me be very clear with this. There is a hierarchy in Nashville, Tennessee, and the great songwriters belong to big publishing companies or big record labels, and they decide who's going to hear those songs first, and only if the people that heard them first pass on those songs will other artists get a chance to hear them at all. And so George Strait has always been on the top of that heap, and so he gets the best songs played for him first, and he deserves that because he makes hits out of them. Also have a belief that, and he's never said this to me personally, but I believe it because I heard Merle Haggard say one time that he's never sang a song that he hasn't lived, whether he wrote it or not. And I believe that about George because I hear the honesty in every song he records, and he's one of the greatest of all time. And like you said, he has written some songs recently, and I think that's because, and again, I'm guessing here, that he wants that as part of his legacy, and it's also a challenge, to let people know, hey, I can write them too, and like he is the king, no doubt about it. Now, a guy like me who does write, half or more of almost all of my albums, and on this, so far on this album, I've either written or co-written every song that's coming, and I've done that because in my legacy, I want to leave something. I want to make a record that is the most true picture of me at this moment in time, a snapshot of exactly or who I think I am, at this time in my life. And, it benefits me to do that because no other writer knows me like that. So now I'm going in and I'm either writing the songs or I'm co-writing them and letting those writers know my story, about why I want to write a particular song. And so there's a real truth, in that. There's no way that these songs are not going to 100% fit who I am. And I think that George's songs 100% fit who he is. And if you put those two lenses, my lens and his lens, on one set of glasses, you're going to get a complete picture.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I think that, like, it again, like, if it's one of those things where if a song resonates with you as an artist, you want to sing it. And that's, at the end of the day, like, if you're a fan, like I am, if a song resonates with me, like, I may not be cutting the song, but I'm singing along in my car or whatever, So I feel like there has to be, those are, I guess, tied together in a way. One of the things I was going to ask, though, too, is obviously there's had to have been a song out there that got away, that you passed on. Is there any good one that you're like, hindsight 2020 kind of thing?
In my career, Thomas, and this goes back to that, I've never been like one of the end guys, in Nashville, where I got the best songs pitched to me. I had some great songs pitched to me, but not that, they kind of found their way to me. It wasn't like I was fed that constant stream of songs, and it's probably one of the reasons why I have written a lot too. And I can tell you that because there's only one song in my life that I ever passed on that became a hit, just one. And it was Austin, a song that Blake Shelton recorded. And listening to the demo of that song, listening back, I've listened back to it, I would have there's no way I could have talked myself into cutting that song. And you can go on YouTube, Blake Shelton, I think last year or the year before, he dedicated that song to me kind of in a funny way, and he's funny. Blake is absolutely one of the funniest guys I've ever met. And he had dedicated the song to Clay. Thank you for not cutting it. And it became a number one song. But no song have I ever passed on ever became a hit. I'm talking about not even top 20, not even top 30. So that means that I've got a pretty good ear, for if a song is a hit or not. And I can hang my hat on that.
Yeah. I always felt like, I always figured there was at least one out there. One, I guess, like White Whale, that you just kind of passed on. But
I can tell you there are songs that other artists passed on that I made into number one hits, and you know what? I better not do that. Somebody hurts someone's feelings. I will leave that one alone.
Well, I want to close out with just touching on a couple of songs here that I've picked out, if you don't mind. Let's start out with, I feel like it's one of those things, I don't know if there was just it wasn't a top 20 hit for you, but so I don't know if it was just like a local DJ where I grew up that was just loving this song, and because I just remember it being played on the radio a lot, and that's White Palace off your first record.
That song should have been what you would call a single, released nationally as a saying, hey, this is a song we're going for on the charts, let's see who will play it. Man, I still love that song to this day, and believe it or not, we will pull that song out of the archives and do it in concert sometimes. And it's still fun. It's so 90s, and it's a great story, And that's like all the really great songs of the 90s. They had great stories to them. But when I first broke, I first came out. I'm from Beaumont, and so Houston Houston is real close to Beaumont. And there was a DJ there who worked at 93Q Country, and Dean Hallam was his name, and he loved that song so much that he played it. Like, I didn't know him very well. It just came out, but he played that song off the first record and charted that song, and it wasn't even a single, which is, it's kind of unusual to chart a song that's not a single, you know. And
Right.
some people still do it, but it's rare. And so when we went to Houston, or when we went to Fort Worth, when we played that song, people absolutely lost their minds over it. And they still do. You know, there's still some fans out there that have been lifelong fans that want to hear that song live. And so I really appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I like I said, like I just remember that being played a lot as a kid, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
And where did you hear it? Where were you when you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in Fort Stockton, so it
Okay,
had to be
you
on
heard
the.
it there.
It had to be like the Odessa Midland area. I remember like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this goes back to the ballads thing, and this is probably like one of my. It's probably like in that top 5 for me. Where do I fit in the picture? That's the song that you wrote by yourself early on. Well, what's the story behind that song?
That's a tough one. I had a girlfriend, and we dated for a few years. Really, really, really good girl. And you know, I thought we would get married. You know, we didn't, and so a lot of my first album was written about her. And you know, it's one of those things that's hard to explain. You know, there's just so much history there, and then when things don't work out, you just got to accept it and move on. And that was what it was for me. And that's a true song. You know, all those songs on my first album were true, and very much, you know, centered around her. And so, you know, I look at it as a beautiful time in my life. It's a rough time in my life, but it was a beautiful time too. And you know, I probably quit doing that song just because it was kind of painful, you know. But now I can do it sometimes now. And it's just fine, you know. Yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah. All right. So this one right here, like I'm looking back on it, I'm trying to think like, was this kind of a thing before this song came out? Long story short, was like Live Laugh Love a thing, or like a meme before you cut this song back in
Which one now?
Live Laugh Love, like back in
yeah. Well, no, you know, I'd never seen that before, you know. And then after we recorded Live Laugh Love, but you know, that's one of the funnest songs I've ever done. You know, the video was really fun too. And I loved, you know, it kind of had that Latin feel to it, you know, and growing up in Texas, of course, you know, the Latino thing is very, you know, innate in all of us down there, you know, just love it. But I remember after I cut the song and it became a hit, I'd go in every garden store, you know, there'd be this Live, Laugh, Love. I mean, they were everywhere. I was like, what in the world? You know, and it was even in Lowe's, you know, and it was there. So it was kind of neat. You know, I wouldn't take credit for it, you know, but it certainly seemed, you know, certainly seemed ironic, you know, that it happened right around there.
Yeah, like it's. I feel like you go into any sorority house and it's on the wall somewhere, just as a
yeah.
And yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if it. Obviously, I was a kid back then, but I didn't know if that was really a thing before then. So
no, it you know, and I'm not. Again, like I said, I'm not trying to take credit for that, but I had literally never seen it anywhere, you know. And then we had the hit, and then you saw it everywhere. Bumper stickers, you know, in stores. You know, it was themed out in restaurants. It was, you know, it was in garden stores. It was Live, Laugh, Love. It was everywhere, you know. And I'm sure, though, you know, that it's a coincidence. You know, I don't think one song could have that big of an influence. Just crazy. And if it does, great. You know, pay me.
Yeah, no kidding. so another big song around this time that, I just remember just being on the radio and like just okay, so like my dad owns a trailer company out in Fort Stockton, and he's got this big shop, and we just listen to the radio while we're working, and it's all these welders out there, just tough guys, and this song would come on, and I feel like you would see people kind of like take a break, and that's The Chain of Love. That song was such an emotional, weighty song.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And when you say welders, you obviously touch a spot with me. My dad was a welder by trade, and it, every day he'd come home, you could smell you smell the rods that he burned all day long, that were on his clothes, and he wore starched clothes. That's one of the reasons why I wore starched clothes when I came out, in the early '90s. And I'd be wearing a starched shirt, starched jeans. Hell, that's all I ever saw. Was that.
Mm-hmm.
Welders did it for protection, and saving the shirt and saving themselves. And that song, in particular, was first time I heard it. I almost missed it because. You don't really get the whole message until the last line of the song, and so that's a song that, I mean, I've had grown men, come to me and say, "The song made me weep," Notably, I'll tell you, that song has opened a lot of doors for me that I would never have expected. Two people in particular. One was, I was on a putting green years ago, and Kevin Costner, whom I did not know at that time, walked over to me and said, "Hey," he said, "I really love this song you got about this guy named Joe," and I was shocked that he even listened to country music, but it was. He just said it affected me. He said it made me feel emotional. I was like, Kevin Costner is a stud. I could imagine him showing any kind of emotion, but he and I became friends because of it. Same thing with Joe Montana, one of the most famous quarterbacks of all time. And then probably the big shocker was I get this call from Clint Eastwood, and and I knew it was him. At first I thought, man, maybe this is one of my buddies, playing a joke on me or something, because they knew I was a big Clint Eastwood fan. And anyway, it was Clint. And he said, "Hey," he said, "wanted you to know I've been listening to this song a lot." He said, "I got your phone number from a mutual friend we have," and I knew the friend very well. And he said, "I just wanted to call you and let you know I'd like to use that song in a movie." And I was like, "What do you say to that?" And I said, "Well, I would love that." And so he put it in this movie that he did with Tommy Lee Jones called Space Cowboys. And it's in the bar scene in Space Cowboys, and they only used two songs. They used that one and an Eagles song, and I think it was "Take It to the Limit," might have been. But it's pretty cool, to be able to share that with Clint, and just the whole thing, man. That song has a very special place in my heart, and it, the story of it is incredible. It's kind of like Pay It Forward, everybody, and of course the song came out before that movie, but it just, I think it's what our fan base is made up of, those kind of people.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just getting Joe Montana, Kevin Costner, Clint Eastwood. I mean, are you going to get a Yellowstone cameo at some point?
I don't know, man. You never know. It's a great show, though. It's my favorite show out right now.
Yeah, it's I know everyone that I know just binge watches it whenever it's out, or I guess a little bit after it's out, then they watch everything.
Yeah.
You mentioned this in passing a minute ago. This song, "I Can't Sleep." That's like, just an incredibly great, almost like, it's almost kind of like an R&B song in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. That song was, there's a unique story to it. Unique to me at least. I was down in Galveston, and I had been, I'd had the melody, for a while in my head, and writing songs. I think most songwriters could tell you that, great songs will haunt you, trying to come out. They just want to be written. They want to be written. And, I'd had probably a couple of bourbons, and I'd sitting, out on the beach in Galveston, and I started writing on that song, and I actually saw the sun come up. But that's a very unique thing for me, and that's happened to me a couple times in my life where I've written until the sun came up, and but that song for me is just soulful, and part of the. When I was growing up, there was this guy named Earl Thomas Conley, and a lot of newcomers to country music might not have ever heard of him, but he had the most soulful ballads, Holding Her and Loving You, Once in a Blue Moon, like just monstrous songs and real soulful voice. And so, I would think that he had a big influence on me coming up, and so I think that's what was trying to come out in that song, was that real soulful, sultry kind of country vibe, and that's the hardest song to sing that I've ever written or recorded. There's not another song that stretches a vocal out as much as that one.
Yeah. You mentioned Earl Thomas Conley. You cut one of his songs, and usually like people. I mean, you'll see it every once in a while where, an established artist will cut an old song by someone else that's an established song. You mentioned obviously him being such an integral influence on you early on, that soulful country feel. What was like? Was there any hesitation cutting that song, or was it just like, I gotta cut it, and we're not going to release it as a single or anything, but I have to have this?
I don't think we'd ever plan on releasing it as a single, but something unique happened with the song you're talking about called Holding Her and Loving You.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first song that I learned how to play on guitar in the key of G. My dad had been teaching me, but that's the song I wanted to learn how to play and sing. And I was 12. I started learning how to play the guitar when I was about 9 or 10. But when I was 12 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a singer. There was not any question in my mind whatsoever I was going to be a singer. And I wanted to learn how to play that song. And my dad taught me how to play it. We'd listen to the radio. I'd literally wait for it to come on the radio. That's not a joke. And try to play along with it. So you didn't have the advantage of owning the song on a record or anything. So anyway, that song was always special to me, and every night in the bars I would sing that song. And then one night after I became known, we did there's a thing called Country Radio Seminar, and we were going to go by 93Q Country. And again, there's that Dean Hallam guy, and he's from Houston, he was in Nashville, and we were recording a live show with them. And I played Holding Her, Loving You live. He put that on the radio station in Houston and charted it on the country charts, the live version. And I was like, oh my gosh. People loved it so much that I had the confidence to go in and then record it some years later. I went in and recorded it, so there is a recording of it. I never was afraid to do it. It wasn't like I was going to be compared or try to compare myself to Earl Thomas Conley's version of it. That really didn't intimidate me because I'd been singing it my whole life, and it was just something that felt like who I was. I'll tell you, I was intimidated once. I did a recording before the next Teardrop Falls with Freddie Fender, and I'd called Freddie, to see if he would do it, and he consented, to doing it, and he came into Nashville, or we both met in Nashville. I came into Nashville too, and man, the reverence that the musicians had for him was just, it was overwhelming. When Freddie Fender walked into the studio, you would have thought Elvis Presley walked in there. I couldn't believe the respect and reverence he's got. Now, I always have had it for him, but I didn't know how Nashville felt about him. We did that, and obviously there's some Spanish in it as well, and I sang the Spanish part, and that's one of the highlights of my career.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
Well, I got to tell you, you've been a great host and interviewer today. I'm blown away by the depth of the questions and the preparedness, that you came into it with. I probably all the artists that you've interviewed feel that way, but I just want you to know I've thoroughly enjoyed this and enjoyed every minute of this time we spent today. I think I'm going to have a tough time going into any other interviews. You've got to set the tone, set the bar.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that. All right, y'all, that is it for this first episode of the Neon Eon. Thanks so much for listening, and a giant thank you to Clay Walker. Next week's episode is with another pretty big star of the day. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you don't want to miss it. So go ahead and make sure you're subscribed. Okay, I'll see y'all next week.